I buried my husband 6 months ago. At least that is what I believed. Grief does not arrive all at once. It settles slowly, like dust you do not notice until everything feels dull. For half a year I learned how to live inside that dullness. I learned how to wake up without reaching for him, how to eat breakfast alone, how to sit in a quiet house and pretend the silence was peaceful instead of cruel. I visited the cemetery every Sunday morning, not because anyone asked me to, but because routine gave my days shape. I would stand there until my legs ached, reading his name carved into stone, tracing the letters with my fingers as if touch could keep him real. Thomas Hale. My husband of 41 years. The doctors said the accident was severe. The police said it was better not to see him. The casket stayed closed. People told me I was strong. I nodded because that is what widows are expected to do. 6 months later I went to the grocery store. Grief does not excuse an empty refrigerator. And I had learned that life keeps demanding ordinary things even when your heart is anything but ordinary. I stood in the aisle with canned vegetables, wondering when breathing had started to feel like work. Then I heard a sound I knew better than my own name. A soft cough. A quiet mutter about prices being ridiculous. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was familiar. My body reacted before my mind did. My hand stopped mid-reach. My breath caught in my throat. That voice belonged to a man I had listened to every day for 4 decades. I turned. 3 shelves down stood a man holding a shopping basket, squinting at labels the way my husband always had. The slope of his shoulders. The way his hair refused to behave. The scar near his eyebrow that came from a fall he used to laugh about. The jar slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. People gasped. Someone asked if I was all right. I barely heard them. My feet were already moving. "Thomas," I said, my voice breaking as it left me. He turned. For a heartbeat, hope surged through me so violently it hurt. I expected recognition. I expected shock. I expected him to say my name. Instead, his face filled with confusion. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Those words cut deeper than grief ever had. I stepped closer, shaking. "No. It's me. Eleanor. Your wife." He stepped back. "My name is Daniel," he replied. "I don't know you." The voice was his. The face was his. The warmth of his hand when he touched my shoulder to calm me felt exactly the same. I showed him a photograph. I pointed out memories only we shared. I begged without realizing I was begging. He denied everything. Then he walked away. People whispered. Someone pitied me. They thought I was a grieving widow losing her grip on reality. They were wrong. As I watched him leave, one thought screamed inside my head. Louder than fear, louder than grief. If my husband was alive, then who was buried in his grave? And whatever the answer was, I knew my life was about to fracture open. I should have left the store. I should have gone home, locked the door, and told myself grief had finally fractured something inside me. That would have been easier. But I did not leave. I watched him from the end of the aisle as he paid for his groceries. He used cash, folding the bills with deliberate care. My husband had always done that, pressing the edges flat as if order could be found even in small things. When he declined the receipt, my chest tightened. That habit alone had survived decades. When he pushed the cart toward the exit, my body followed before my mind could argue. Outside, the air felt too sharp, too real. He loaded groceries into an old sedan, its paint faded, a dent along the rear door. Not the car Thomas owned. Not the one he polished every weekend. Still, the way he arranged the bags was unmistakable. Heavy items first. Bread on top. Eggs last. I memorized the license plate without meaning to. When he drove away, I stood frozen for a moment, then walked to my own car. The one my husband bought me before the accident, insisting I deserved something safe. Something reliable. I followed him. Not closely. 3 car lengths back. Far enough to avoid suspicion. Close enough to keep him in sight. My hand shook on the steering wheel. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it through the glass. We passed streets I knew, then turned into neighborhoods I rarely visited. Smaller homes. Older trees. The kind of places people chose for privacy, not show. He parked in front of a pale green house with a white fence and wind chimes hanging near the porch. Then the door opened. A woman stepped out. Mid-50s, maybe younger than me. Comfortable clothes. No effort to impress. She smiled when she saw him. Not politely. Familiar. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. My vision blurred. She took a bag from his hand and said something I could not hear, but I recognized the tone. Routine. Ease. Shared life. Then 2 children ran out the door. A boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 10. They ran straight toward him, arms wide. "Grandpa!" the girl shouted. That laugh. The sound hit me like a physical blow. The same uneven, warm laugh I had heard across dinner tables and quiet mornings for 41 years. He crouched to hug them. The woman rested a hand on his back. They went inside together. The door closed. I sat in my car, frozen, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers ached. Tears came without drama. No sobbing. Just steady, quiet disbelief. 41 years of marriage. 6 months of mourning. And he was alive, laughing, holding children who were not mine. I took pictures. The house. The car. The address. Proof, though I did not yet know who I needed to prove it to. That night I did not sleep. I spread old photo albums across the kitchen table. Wedding photos. Beach trips. Birthday candles. I compared every detail to the images on my phone. The scar above his eyebrow. The uneven ears. The crooked finger from a childhood injury. Grief does not invent scars. By dawn, one truth settled deep inside me. This was not a miracle. This was a lie. And lies this carefully built do not exist without help. The next morning I made one phone call. And with every word my son said, my life began to unravel. I waited until morning to make the call. Not because I was calm, but because I needed my voice to sound steady. 3:40 in the morning, fear feels like truth. By daylight, people can dismiss it as grief. I dialed my son's number just after sunrise. He answered on the 4th ring. "Mom." His voice was thick with sleep. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said. "I need you to come over." There was a pause. I could hear him shifting, sitting up. "Mom, what happened? Are you sick?" "I'm not sick," I replied. "But something happened yesterday that I can't explain alone." Another pause. Longer this time. "If this is about Dad again," he said carefully. "We talked about this. You've been through a lot. Grief can." "I saw him," I said. Silence. "I saw your father yesterday. Alive." The breath he took was sharp and controlled. Too controlled. "Mom," he said slowly. "Did you miss your medication?" That question hurt more than anything else he could have said. "I followed him home," I continued. "I saw where he lives. I saw his family." This time he did not interrupt. "Stay there," he finally said. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming." When he arrived 40 minutes later, he didn't knock. He let himself in the way he always had, as if the house still belonged to both of us. He found me at the kitchen table surrounded by photographs. "Mom," he said softly. "What is going on?" I handed him my phone without speaking. I watched his face as he scrolled. First confusion, then disbelief, then something colder. Fear. "He looks like Dad," he said carefully. "But people resemble each other. It happens." "Did you see his hand?" I asked. "The finger." Lucas rubbed his face. "Mom, we buried Dad. You were there." "I was there." "A closed casket," I said quietly. He looked away. "They said it was better that way," he replied. "The accident was bad." "Did you see his body, Lucas?" "No," he admitted. "Neither did I." The room felt suddenly very small. "I want to go back there," I said, standing. "I want you to come with me." "Mom, this isn't healthy." "Are you coming?" I asked. "Or am I going alone?" He hesitated just long enough for the truth to start cracking through. "Fine," he said. "We'll go. So you can see it's not him." We drove in silence. When we turned onto the street with the pale green house, my heart began racing again. "That's the one," I said. We parked a short distance away. After a few minutes, the front door opened. The man stepped out. Lucas leaned forward. The color drained from his face. He didn't blink. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe. The man walked past our car. Tears slid down my son's cheeks. "Mom," he whispered. I knew then. before he said another word. Whatever truth he had been carrying had just become too heavy to hold. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel, shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry," he said. Those words landed like a verdict. "Tell me," I said. "Now." He lifted his head. His eyes were red, filled with something I had never seen before. "Shame. Dad didn't die in that accident." The words hung between us. "He had another family," Lucas continued. "For over 20 years. I stared straight ahead. "How long did you know?" 3 years, he admitted. "I found paperwork. Duplicate bills. 2 households. And you said nothing." "He begged me not to tell you," Lucas whispered. "He said it would destroy you." My voice was steady when I asked, "What happened 6 months ago?" "He wanted to leave you," Lucas said. "But he didn't want to lose everything. So he decided it would be easier if you thought he was dead." My hands began to shake. "And the body?" "There was a man," he said. "Terminally ill. No family. They staged it." I closed my eyes. "You let me bury a stranger." "Yes." "You watched me grieve." "Yes." Lucas collapsed into sobs. "I didn't know how to stop it," he said. "I thought time would heal you. Time had not healed me. Truth was about to change everything. That night, grief died inside me, and something colder took its place." We did not go home right away. Lucas sat in the car, staring at the house as if it might disappear if he looked long enough. I watched the curtains shift slightly in one of the windows. Someone was inside. Someone who believed they were safe. "How many people know?" I asked. Lucas swallowed. 3. Me, his wife, and the lawyer who helped him disappear. A lawyer. That detail settled heavily in my chest. "So this wasn't a moment of panic," I said. "This was planned." "Yes," he admitted. "Dad had everything prepared. New identity. New records." He waited until the timing was right. And I was the timing. He nodded. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Those reactions belonged to the woman I used to be. Instead, something inside me folded neatly into place. "Take me home," I said. When we arrived, Lucas followed me inside, still talking, still apologizing, still explaining. I let his voice fade into background noise as I moved through the house. I opened drawers, cabinets, filing boxes. Every document I found felt suddenly unfamiliar. My life had been built on trust, and trust had been a lie. "Mom," Lucas said gently, "please say something." "I am thinking," I replied. That night, after he left, I locked every door and sat alone in the dark. I did not mourn. I audited. The next morning I made a list. Life insurance, death certificate, estate documents, the accident report, the lawyer's name. Each item represented a thread, and threads could be pulled. I called the insurance company first. "I need to review my late husband's policy," I said calmly. The woman on the line was polite, helpful. "Of course, Mrs. Carter. Everything was paid out without issue." "Was there any unusual documentation submitted?" I asked. There was a pause. "I'm not sure I'm authorized." "I was the beneficiary," I said. "And I believe fraud may be involved." That changed everything. Within minutes, I was transferred to a supervisor. By afternoon, a fraud review had been opened. Next, I called the funeral home. The director recognized my name immediately. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Was the body identified visually?" Another pause. "No," he said. "We were instructed not to open the casket." "Instructed by whom?" "The attorney handling arrangements." I thanked him and hung up. Then I called the attorney's office. The receptionist's voice was cheerful. "I'm calling regarding my husband's estate," I said. "I believe there may have been misrepresentation." Her cheer faded. "Let me transfer you." The attorney came on the line sounding irritated. "Mrs. Carter, I understand you're experiencing delayed grief reactions." "Stop," I said. "If my husband is alive, everything you helped file becomes criminal." Silence. "I know where he lives," I continued. "And I know you helped him disappear." The attorney cleared his throat. "This conversation is over," he said. "No," I replied. "It's just beginning." I hung up and wrote his name at the top of my list. That afternoon, I went to the police station. I did not accuse. I did not dramatize. I presented facts. A death with no body viewed. Insurance paid out. A living man under a new identity. A lawyer involved. The detective listened without interrupting. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, "if this is true, it's not just fraud. It's a felony conspiracy." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm here." When I returned home, the house felt different. Not lonely. Defended. I changed the locks. I changed passwords. I opened a new bank account in my own name only. Lucas called that night. "Mom," he said quietly, "what are you going to do?" I looked at the list on my table. "I'm going to make sure," I said, "that the man who erased me never gets to live peacefully again." But before the law could touch him, I decided to face the lie myself. I did not tell anyone where I was going. Not Lucas. Not the detective. Not even myself, not fully. I simply put on my coat, drove back to that quiet street, and parked across from the pale green house once again. The wind chimes on the porch were moving gently. The sound was soft. Domestic. Peaceful. It angered me more than shouting ever could. I sat in the car for several minutes, breathing slowly, grounding myself the way I had learned after the funeral. Back then I had used that technique to survive grief. Now I used it to contain something sharper. I walked up the path and stood in front of the door. For a moment my hand hovered in the air. Then I knocked. Footsteps approached. I recognized them immediately. That familiar uneven rhythm. The same one I had heard pacing hospital rooms and hallways for decades. The door opened. For a fraction of a second he smiled. Then he saw my face. The color drained from him so quickly I thought he might collapse. "You're dead," he whispered. I smiled gently. "Funny," I said. "That's what everyone thought about you." Behind him the woman appeared. The one I had seen kiss his cheek. She froze when she saw me. "Who is this?" she asked. He didn't answer. "I'm his wife," I said calmly. "Or at least I was until 6 months ago, when he pretended to die." The woman stepped back as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. "You told me she knew," she said, turning to him. "You said she agreed." "I never agreed," I replied. "I buried a stranger. I mourned a man who was eating breakfast here." The children appeared in the hallway behind her. "Go to your room," she said sharply, not taking her eyes off me. They hesitated, confused, then disappeared. The silence that followed was thick. "Please," he said quietly, "don't do this here." "You don't get to choose where the truth lives," I answered. He stepped aside. I entered the house. It smelled like coffee and toast. A family mourning. Framed photos lined the walls. Birthday parties. School plays. Holidays. Years of moments that were never meant to include me. "How long?" I asked. The woman answered before he could. 23 years. I nodded slowly. "You were married to me for 41. I loved you," he said quickly. You loved comfort," I interrupted. "And silence." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You said she was cold. That she didn't see you anymore." I turned to her. "I buried him." Her breath hitched. "He planned everything," she whispered. "The lawyer. The accident report. He said it was the only way to protect everyone." "To protect himself," I corrected. I looked at him then. Really looked. He seemed smaller. Older. Not the man I had mourned. "I'm not here to scream," I said. "I'm not here to beg or forgive." "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to know," I replied, "that the life you stole from me is being returned piece by piece. Through the law. Through truth. Through consequences." His shoulders sagged. "I won't fight you," he said. "You already did," I answered. I turned toward the door. As I stepped outside, the wind chimes rang again. Behind me, the door remained open. For the first time since his so-called death, I felt something close to peace. Not closure. Control. What he didn't know was that the investigation had already reached his front door. The police arrived 2 days later. Not with sirens. Not with handcuffs. Just 2 calm officers in plain clothes, knocking politely on the pale green door. That detail mattered to me. Justice does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives the way truth always does. Quiet, undeniable, and impossible to send away. I was not there when it happened. I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking tea when the detective called. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "We've confirmed enough to proceed." I closed my eyes. "What does that mean?" I asked, in plain language. "It means your husband's death was falsified," he said. "The insurance payout is fraudulent. The attorney is under investigation. And your husband is being formally questioned under his real identity." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat very still. I expected to feel victorious, or relieved, or angry. Instead, I felt finished. Lucas came by that evening. He looked exhausted, as if the weight he had been carrying for years had finally crushed him. "They took Dad in for questioning," he said quietly. "They didn't arrest him yet, but they seized documents, computers, accounts." I nodded. "Good." He sat across from me, hands clasped tightly together. "They're looking at me too," he admitted, "for knowing and not reporting it." I met his eyes. That's how accountability works. Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't argue. "I was scared," he said. "I didn't want to lose either of you." "You lost me anyway," I replied gently, just more slowly. He flinched, but I could see something shift inside him. The beginning of adulthood. The kind that doesn't arrive with age, but with consequences. Over the next week, details emerged piece by piece. The terminally ill man whose body had been used. The falsified accident report. The shell accounts. The attorney who had signed off on everything. The media never used my name. I made sure of that. I had already been erased once. I wasn't interested in becoming a headline now. What mattered was restoration. The insurance company reversed the payout. Assets were frozen. Charges were filed. The man I had once loved was no longer a ghost. He was a defendant. One afternoon I received a letter from him. Handwritten. Careful. Controlled. He wrote about regret. About fear. About loving two lives and choosing the easier one. I read it once. Then I placed it in a folder labeled evidence. That was all it was now. Lucas asked if I would testify if it went to court. "Yes," I said. Calmly. Truthfully. "Do you hate him?" he asked. I thought about it. "No," I answered. "Hate would mean he still owns part of me." That weekend I did something small but meaningful. I took down our wedding photo from the living room wall. Not in anger. Not in pain. Simply because it no longer belonged there. In its place I hung a mirror. For the first time in months, when I looked at my reflection, I didn't see a widow. I saw a woman who survived deception, loss, and betrayal, and did not disappear. But the final truth wasn't revealed in court. It came from someone I never expected. I thought I had reached the end of the surprises. By then, I believed I understood the full shape of the betrayal. The double life. The fake death. The legal mess slowly unfolding like a carefully folded map. I assumed whatever pain remained would arrive through official channels. Court dates, documents, signatures. I was wrong. The final truth arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, carried by a woman who had never been part of my life before. She introduced herself with a knock at my door. "My name is Margaret Hale," she said softly. "I'm the nurse who cared for the man whose death certificate bears your husband's name." I invited her in without speaking. She sat across from me, holding her purse tightly in her lap, as if afraid it might escape. "I wasn't supposed to come," she said. "But I couldn't live with myself anymore." I waited. Silence has a way of encouraging honesty. "The man who died," she continued. "His name was Samuel Price. He was alone. No family. He agreed to the arrangement because he believed it would help someone else live." My hands folded neatly in front of me. "He was promised," she said, voice trembling, "that the woman who lost her husband would be taken care of, that you would be protected, that you would never suffer." I laughed then. Not bitterly. Not loudly. Just once. "I buried a stranger," I said, "and suffered anyway." Margaret nodded, tears forming. "That's why I'm here. Because what they told him, it wasn't true." She reached into her purse and placed an envelope on the table. Inside were copies of handwritten notes, medical records, and one letter. Samuel's letter. He had written it days before his death, in shaky handwriting, apologizing to a woman he had never met. He wrote that he hoped I would forgive him, that he believed he was doing something kind, that he trusted the man who promised my safety. I kept this, Margaret said. I didn't know what else to do. I held the letter carefully, as if it might dissolve. For the first time since all of this began, my anger shifted direction. This was no longer just betrayal. It was exploitation. Not only of me, but of a dying man who had been used as a tool. I will give this to my lawyer, I said. She nodded. I hoped you would. When she left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at the empty chair. My husband had not just abandoned me. He had built his escape on the suffering of others. That realization changed something fundamental inside me. That evening, Lucas came over again. They're expanding the charges, he said quietly. Your lawyer called me. There's now evidence of coercion. I showed him the letter. He read it slowly, then covered his face. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, I said. And for the first time I truly did. Some lies are so large that even those nearby only see fragments. What happens now? He asked. Now, I replied. The truth finishes what it started. That night, I placed Samuel's letter in the evidence folder. But I kept a copy for myself. Not as proof. As a reminder of how easily kindness can be manipulated, and how important it is to protect your own truth. I thought justice would bring peace. But peace arrived in a far quieter way. There is a moment after devastation that no one prepares you for. Not the collapse itself, but the stillness that follows. When the phone stops ringing. When court dates are scheduled far into the future. When outrage fades into routine. That was where I found myself. The investigation continued without me needing to push anymore. Evidence moved through legal hands. Statements were filed. Charges expanded, refined, formalized. My role had shifted from seeker to witness. And in that shift, something unsettling happened. I had time. Too much of it. For years, my life had been defined by response. Supporting, forgiving, waiting, enduring. Even grief had given me a task: mourn, survive, repeat. Now there was no role left to play. I woke up one morning and realized I had not cried in days. That frightened me more than the tears ever had. I started taking long walks in the early hours, before neighbors stepped outside with their coffee mugs and polite curiosity. I walked without direction, letting my body decide where to go. Sometimes I ended up at the river. Sometimes nowhere memorable at all. Movement helped. So did observation. I began noticing things I had ignored for decades. The way morning light fractured through trees, the sound of my own breath, the unfamiliar sensation of not needing permission to exist quietly. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of a small community library I had passed 100 times. I went inside, not looking for answers, just shelter. A volunteer with kind eyes asked if I needed help. I said no. She smiled and returned to her desk. I wandered until I found a table by the window and sat down. That's where I met Ruth. She was older than me by a few years, silver hair pulled into a loose braid, hands steady despite the slight tremor in her voice. She asked if the seat across from me was taken. We did not exchange names at first. We talked about books, about weather, about nothing. Then, without warning, she said, "My husband disappeared when I was 52. I looked up. Not died, she clarified. Disappeared. Left his wallet, his car, his wedding ring. I didn't interrupt. I spent years looking, she continued. Years believing I had missed something, that I hadn't loved enough. She folded her hands. Turns out he just wanted a different life. Thought vanishing would be easier than telling the truth. The words landed gently but firmly. How did you survive? I asked. She smiled. I stopped trying to understand him and started asking who I was without the explanation. That question followed me home. Who was I, without the mystery, without the betrayal, without the role of victim or investigator? That evening my attorney called. They've scheduled the preliminary hearing, she said. Your presence is not required, but you're welcome to attend. Will it change anything? I asked. No, she admitted. Not really. I won't come, I said. After we hung up, I expected guilt. It didn't come. I realized something important then. Choosing not to relive pain is not avoidance. It's discernment. A few days later, Lucas asked if we could meet. We chose a cafe halfway between our homes, neutral ground. He looked older. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quickly. I just didn't want silence to be the last thing between us. Silence had once been my prison. Now it was my protection. I don't hate you, I said. But trust doesn't heal on a schedule. He nodded. I'm starting therapy, he added. They suggested it. That's good, I said, and meant it. When we parted, there were no promises. Only honesty. That felt like progress. Weeks passed. The legal machine moved slowly, predictably. Updates arrived by email. Words like restitution, sentencing guidelines, and liability replaced the emotional language that had once ruled my days. I read them calmly. Then one morning I did something unexpected. I packed a small suitcase. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not because I wanted secrecy, but because I didn't need witnesses. I drove north toward a coastal town Thomas and I had once planned to visit someday. I stayed in a modest inn with creaky floors and thin curtains. I walked the beach alone, letting wind erase the last echoes of anger from my chest. On the third day, I stood at the water's edge and realized something profound. I was no longer waiting for justice to define my future. Justice was doing its job. I was free to do mine. That night, I wrote in a notebook for the first time in decades. Not letters, not lists, just thoughts. I wrote about the woman I had been, the woman I was becoming, and the space between them that felt terrifying and open and alive. I did not write about him. When I returned home, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt unfinished. And for the first time, that felt like an invitation instead of a loss. I believed closure came from answers. But what if it comes from choosing not to ask anymore? There is a strange power in paperwork. Not the dramatic kind people imagine. No shouting, no confessions under bright lights, but quiet decisions typed in plain language that permanently alter a life. That was where everything began to settle. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly, my name printed in careful ink. I recognized the return address immediately. My attorney. I did not open it right away. I made tea first. I stood by the kitchen window and watched a neighbor rake leaves he would never fully collect. I let the kettle cool a little before pouring. Only then did I sit. The letter was brief. The court had finalized the restitution order. Assets recovered. Accounts restored. Titles corrected. My legal status, widow by fraud, officially amended. And then, at the bottom, a question I had not expected. Would I like to restore my marital name in full? Or formally dissolve it retroactively under false pretenses? In simpler terms, the law was asking me something deeply personal. Did I want to remain legally bound to a man who never truly existed as I knew him? I read the paragraph 3 times. For 41 years, my identity had been tied to his name. I had signed it, defended it, carried it through rooms where I shrank myself to make it sound gentler. Now the law was offering me a quiet exit. No explanation required. That afternoon I drove to the courthouse not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the gravity of the choice. The building was ordinary. Beige walls. Fluorescent lights. A place where lives changed without ceremony. The clerk slid the form toward me. You can take your time, she said kindly. Picked up the pen. For a moment my hand hovered. I thought about the young woman I had been when I first signed that name. Hopeful, certain, unafraid of permanence. I thought about the woman I had become, loyal, patient, slowly erased. And then I thought about the woman I was now. Awake. I checked the box. When I handed the form back, nothing dramatic happened. No weight lifted. No tears fell. But when I walked outside, the air felt different. Lighter. That evening Lucas called. They sentenced him today, he said quietly. I did not ask how long. It's done, he added. Yes, I replied. It is. There was a pause. I'm proud of you, he said finally. Not for what you did, but for how you didn't disappear. That stayed with me. In the weeks that followed, I began making decisions that had nothing to do with recovery or justice. I repainted the bedroom. I donated clothes I had kept out of habit. I rearranged furniture simply because I could. Small acts but intentional ones. One morning I visited the cemetery again. Not to mourn but to correct something. I stood in front of the stone bearing my former husband's name and placed a simple request with the groundskeeper. A quiet amendment. No details. Just the removal of my name from beneath his. When it was done I stood back. The stone no longer felt like an accusation. Felt like history. That afternoon I drove past the pale greenhouse one last time. The yard looked unkempt. No wind chimes. Curtains drawn. I did not slow down. At home, I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence. I survived the truth. Not elegantly. Not heroically. But honestly. And that, I realized, was enough. I thought reclaiming my life meant confronting the past. But what if it meant releasing it entirely? The ending did not arrive with applause. No courtroom victory speech. No sudden joy. No dramatic sense of triumph. What came instead was something quieter. And far more lasting. Normal days. I woke up one morning and realized I no longer measured time by what had been taken from me. The past existed, yes, but it no longer pressed its weight against my chest. It had settled into memory where it belonged. The house sounded different then. Not emptier. Just honest. I began opening the windows every morning, letting air move freely through rooms that had once held too many unspoken things. I stopped keeping the television on for background noise. Silence no longer frightened me. It felt earned. One afternoon, I received a final envelope from my attorney. Inside was confirmation that all legal matters were closed. No appeals. No further obligations. No loose ends. I placed the letter in a drawer I rarely opened. Some things do not need to be revisited to remain true. Lucas and I settled into something new. Not forgiveness, not distance, but clarity. We spoke occasionally. Carefully. With intention. He was building his own life now, one that required honesty to survive. I wished him well without attaching myself to the outcome. That too was freedom. I returned to the library often. Sometimes Ruth was there. Sometimes she wasn't. We never planned it. We didn't need to. When she was, we talked about books we hadn't finished and places we might never go. Once she said, "You look lighter." "I am," I answered. I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Spring arrived gently. I planted herbs in the backyard. Nothing ambitious. Just things that could grow in small spaces with patience. I liked checking on them in the morning, brushing the leaves between my fingers, reminding myself that tending to life did not require urgency, only care. One evening, I stood in the hallway and noticed the mirror where the wedding photo had once hung. I had kept it there. Not as a reminder of loss, but as evidence of presence. The woman who looked back at me was not the same one who had stood at a grave months earlier. She was quieter. Stronger. Unafraid of unanswered questions. I realized then that closure is not something someone gives you. It is something you allow yourself to stop seeking. I did not forgive the betrayal. I released it. There is a difference. On the first anniversary of the truth, not the death, not the lie, but the truth, I took a walk at dawn. The world felt new in the way only familiar things can after a long night. I breathed deeply. And for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel like I was beginning again. I felt like I had arrived. If you've ever had to rebuild after trust was taken from you, remember this: your life does not end where the lie began. Thank you for listening.